Hi, this is Krista Lay.
And I'm Craig Aarons Martin.
We're the co-hosts of the SEL in EDU podcast.
Proud member of the Education Podcast Network.
Each show on the network is independently owned, and the views expressed may not represent those of other podcasts.
For the best education podcast, visit edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Steve Haberlin, PhD. Steve is an author and an assistant professor at the University of Central Florida. Back at episode 760, we talked about his recent book, Calming Student Stress, Mindfulness, Meditation, and Other Strategies to Reduce Anxiety and Enhance Learning in K12 Classrooms. Today, we are focused on helping classroom teachers and building administrators with practical techniques to help alleviate stress. Oh, this is so awesome. You're going to learn so much. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. And oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you helped out the podcast. How could you do this? Oh, glad you asked that question. Here are 3 ways. Number 1, you could tell a friend and share links. Number 2, you could go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And number 3, click on the link on my website homepage where it says, buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 to help me address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That would be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading K12. Teaching, learning, leading K12. Teaching, learning, leading K12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Steve Haberlin, PhD, is an assistant professor of curriculum and instruction in the College of Community Innovation and Education at the University of Central Florida. Dr. Haberlin's research focuses on the implementation of mind-body practices, including mindfulness, meditation interventions to address mental health concerns in educational settings and help students unfold their potential. His research involves studying the impact of brief meditation, including the use of technology-assisted devices to improve focus and reduce stress and anxiety. A lifelong meditator with more than 25 years' experience, his work involves facilitating meditation, professional development training, and workshops for faculty. Dr. Haberlin is the author of Meditation in the College Classroom, a pedagogical tool to help students de-stress, focus, and connect. Also, Awakening to Educational Leadership, a mindfulness-based approach to supporting and coaching teachers, and Calming Student Stress, Mindfulness, Meditation, and Other Strategies to Reduce Anxiety and Enhance Learning in K12 Classrooms, which was released earlier this year. Our focus today is on demystifying meditation practice for educators. Steve, thanks so much for joining me on the show again, and say hi to everyone.
Hey, thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's awesome to have you back. And, last time we talked, you were on episode 760, and we talked about your book, Calming Student Stress, Mindfulness, Meditation, and Other Strategies to Reduce Anxiety and Enhance Learning, K-12 Classrooms. Could you give everyone an overview of your book?
Of course. So the book is a synthesis of different mind-body practices, such as mindfulness, meditation, yoga, visualization, breath work. And I wrote it so that educators, K-12 educators, this could be principals, administrators, counselors, teachers, could have a handbook of just different mind-body tools that they can implement into the classroom that were low or no cost, accessible, easy to implement, and that was the premise of the book. So it was really geared more towards students, but I also had a chapter, I think it's chapter 10 in the back of the book, which was about how teachers and educators could deal with their own stress. And I included that chapter because if you don't have your own kind of stress management down, right, and starts with the self, then how are you going to help students de-stress and calm the classroom? So that's why I put that chapter in there at the end.
Well, that's awesome, and it's a great book, and it's just easy to understand, and great explanations on what you can do to help, and so I appreciate you giving that overview. So before we get into challenges in the school building, could you share your story that led you to learning meditation?
Oh yeah, this is a funny one for me anyway. So I started in martial arts about 11 or 12 years old. I joined, the local karate school because the Karate Kid, this was way before Cobra Kai on Netflix. Karate Kid came out, Ninja Turtles came out, and karate was a phenomenon. So I, of course, joined, and the instructor, the sensei, as we call the teacher, would come in the front of the class. He was kind of this stern, kind of tough-looking guy with a headband, kind of like a Karate Kid headband. And he would tell us to meditate. He would say, get out, kneel down, face the wall. We would turn, face the wall on our knees. his instructions were block everything, sit there, breathe, block everything out, block all distractions, all the noise out. And what was happening during the 80s were aerobic studios were all the rage. So the wall vibrating, reverberating with, I don't know, Gloria Stefan or some other 80s music. So I'm listening to that and I'm sitting there on my knees trying to focus. And, I said, this is meditation. I don't know if I can do this, but it piqued my curiosity. So anyway, fast forward to early 20s. I'm an undergrad. I'm stressed out with school and work, and I'm trying to figure out, do I get married? Do I get a house and kids? How do you what do the kids say today? Adult? How do you do adulting? So we didn't have the term back then, but I felt that. I said, oh my goodness, I'm like entering another chapter, and I didn't feel prepared. I felt very overwhelmed, and I heard a recording. I believe it was from Deepak Chopra, who still teaches today. He was talking about transcendental meditation, which was a form of mantra meditation. And I said, what is that? And I opened we had phone book, Yellow Pages back then. I went down to meditation, and there was a local school. There was a transcendental meditation center. I was living at the time in outside of Providence, Rhode Island. So there was a center in Providence on the east side of Providence. So I went there and took a 4-day course, learned the technique, learned how to meditate. And I immediately started to feel calmer, less stress, more focused. People kind of noticed I was not as uptight, relationships seemed to be smoother. So I stuck with it. I just stuck with it for, the next 20 something years. But, after about, 15, 20 years, I started to experiment with other methods. I wanted to expand my toolbox of meditation. So I looked into Zen meditation, mindfulness, just other practices or other methods of meditation, visualization, and got interested in that. And that kind of spurred my research.
That's awesome. Appreciate it. Our focus today is to get into how meditation practices, can help a teacher overcome or escape burnout feelings. Let's start by looking at what causes stress, anxiety, and possible burnout in a school-based educator's life.
Well, to understand the topic, you got to start right off the bat that teaching is extremely challenging. Teachers listening know this. I'm preaching to the choir, but teaching is extremely challenging and stressful. And the data shows it's an above average burnout rate. It's a profession that has an above average burnout rate. So like frontline workers, police officers, nurses, those kind of things are considered above line average burnout, where people are leaving the profession at higher rates. And teaching has historically been categorized as an above average burnout. And then the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated the stress and the demands, and people had to shift to online teaching and learn all these new virtual tools. So as you can imagine, it went up. But I think it's important to point out that it was a high stress burnout, demanding profession prior to the pandemic. And the factors, as far as it seems like a combination of factors, Steve. So you have demands and expectations that are not always reasonable from administrators, from parents, from students that you're dealing with. And there's been increased workloads, and that could be, taking on extra programs and extracurricular, but also paperwork. There's increased student behavior and discipline issues that teachers are dealing with. So there's parents that, that are just difficult parents, and teachers know that just make the job really stressful. So it's a combination, I think, of factors that lead to burnout for teachers. I don't know if it's any one thing. And interestingly, there was a study done where they determined that student disruption was one of the number one causes of stress that led to burnout, led to teachers leaving the profession, was students not, disrupting instruction, not following the norms and those kind of things.
Gotcha. It is something that, to be able to deal with all kinds of stuff that's coming at you that was from societal world. And then on top of that, kind of depending on the ages, stuff that comes with the ages of the kids.
Yes.
And then on top of that, stuff that just comes with doing your job because it's demanding. And, and you say all that, and boy, that can really, if you don't have a way of dealing with that stress and that anxiety that can be created, that could be kind of destructive to you and your feelings about wanting to even be at work. So
keep teaching, yeah. And another thing, Steve, that I think makes teaching different from other jobs. It's a mental and physically demanding job. Whereas, a lot of jobs that are intellectual or mental, you might be sitting at a computer, right, for most of the day and you're thinking, you have that strict cognitive stress on you. But teaching, you're thinking on your feet and your teaching content have that cognitive stress, but there's the physical demands of always being on your feet and moving and having the energy for the kids and never really getting to sit down. So I think the mental and physical demand of the job combined is really hard. And that might have something to do with just not being able to sustain yourself in the profession.
Oh, so important. And I'm going to use that to transition into this, which is, could you share a little bit about something I've seen you talk about, which is living in survival mode versus being in a creative state? What's that referencing?
Well, sure. So the survival mode, we have this fight. People have always heard, they might not fully understand the mechanism, but they've heard fight or flight, and then it's become fight, flight, or freeze response. It's a very actually ancient mechanism that's built into the body. So anytime there's a danger or a perceived danger, perceived threat, then the body activates, cortisol and adrenaline. It increases its strength. So the muscles will tie in and your pupils dilate, the breathing becomes shallow. So in other words, the body becomes ready to fight or to run. So, a T-Rex, I don't know if it would be a T-Rex, but maybe, you're walking through and a bear is in the woods, and our ancestors would go into this fight or flight so that they could either fight and defend themselves and their family, or they would have the strength and the agility and the endurance to run. The challenge in current societies, we still have that same ancient mechanism built in us, that survival stress response in us, but we don't always have these physical threats, right? Those are fortunately we don't have as many today. It's more like perceived mental threats. Somebody says something we don't like, we read a Facebook or a social media post we don't like, we get some news we don't like, and then we go into that reactive state. So when I talk about survival mode, that's where you're constantly triggering that stress response. So your baseline, you almost create a new baseline, whereas your natural state is more one of relaxed in homeostasis, what we would call homeostasis, balance. But your new baseline becomes, if you're constantly triggering the stress response, it becomes one of tension. So now everything in your focus, your cognitive focus narrows in. So everything is narrowed in, right? Because you're focusing in on problems. Your body becomes very tense and it doesn't function as well. So you might have like digestion problems. That's where sleep, right? A lot of insomnia and sleep problems occur. So you're living in a very tense or stress state. That becomes almost your new baseline. Now, the creative state would be more of what I would call our natural state. And that's where you are activating what's called the parasympathetic nervous system. That's your system. They call it rest and digest. That's where you're relaxed. It's after the stress response. And the body returns to a state of balance. So the breathing is slower and deeper. The muscles are not as tense. They're more relaxed, loose. And cognitively, you're more fluid and open. So your range, your dimension is not as narrow. So you might see more possibilities, right, in life. If a problem happens, you'll see more solutions or options as opposed to being into that narrow fight or flight. So it's living from a state of more balance and grace where you can creatively solve things that come your way. Does that make sense, Steve? As far as that experience, hopefully people have had the experience of more creative open space.
Oh, most definitely. It makes perfect sense, and it fits well with because when you get stressed and you got things going on and all kinds of stuff like that, it's really hard to sit there and go, all right, I'm going to try and figure out how to do this. That'll be neat activity to work with the kids and something. Instead, you're just kind of off on this other planet of this is driving me nuts and stuff like this. And, I don't feel like being creative today. I think it makes perfect sense. It puts you in a whole different place that's not helpful to what you're trying to do to work within a classroom setting or in a building setting or whatever. So,
maybe if we can personalize this a bit more for educators, for teachers. So how about a day where you didn't have a good night's sleep? You maybe had some, arguing at home with your spouse or something. No, the kids are not getting up for school on time and driving you crazy. And you go into the classroom to teach, and your classroom management is coming from one of like this narrow focus, and tension and you just feel cranky and tired and irritable, as opposed to you got a good night's sleep. Maybe you just came off a vacation, a 3-day weekend or something like that, right? You're rested. Maybe you got a little exercise in, you had your green smoothie and you feel good. And then you go into that same management situation in the classroom. It could be two different responses, right? Two different approaches, but you're the same person, but your state is different. So everything looks different to you in that moment. Maybe that probably resonates more with people when they had a bad night's sleep and then you have to manage the classroom.
Oh, it resonates very well. All that other stuff going on, and then you're asked to, it's kind of like a stand-up comedian, be funny, all right? And you're going, I got all this other stuff going on. And
that's right. How can you be creative? Right.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about this. I mean, could you share a little about the empirical benefits of mind-body practices, including meditation? Let's go there for a little bit.
So with the advancement of technology, like brain imaging and brain scanning, and now HRV measurements and devices, we know a lot more about meditation. We know a lot more about the benefits. So there's a lot of scientific data that shows the different benefits. And I can point out a couple of ones that kind of jump out. So first of all, your brain functions differently. It can improve brain functioning. So they found when people get into very deep states of meditation, and we can talk about brainwave states also, but when they get into very deep states, the brain starts to synchronize. So the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere start to work together. You can almost see like a bridge happening between the front part of the brain and the back. So if you think of an orchestra, all of a sudden the orchestra gets into more harmony, right? And synchronization and starts working better together. So when you see more experienced meditators and they do imaging of the brain is actually more synchronized, firing off and working. Different parts of the brain are working together. And you go, oh, so what? Well, they've also correlated that research with high performers. So like managers who do really well, athletes who do really well in sports, high performers and people that are at peak performance, generally there's a high level of synchronization going on within the brain. So it's a good thing to be able to train the brain, right? To kind of uptick it or upgrade it so that it's, more of the brain is working together. The body experiences in a lot of different forms of meditation, very deep rest. So it's not the same as sleep because you're conscious, you're fully awake, but your body, so what will happen is you can even measure this, like your heart rate will slow down, your beats per minute, blood pressure lowers. You're going into the opposite of the fight or flight. Because what happens is during different meditation techniques, the brain starts to say, oh, the more primitive aspects, what we call the amygdala, they start to say, oh, I'm okay. I'm safe. There's no grizzly bear right around the corner. So all of a sudden, the body starts to respond in a relaxed manner. The parasympathetic activates. So your body actually gets a very deep state of rest, and you get very calm, and you'll feel the muscles loosen, you feel the heart rate, the breathing. You'll notice a lot of times the breathing will get very, much deeper and slower. And that's very healthy. That's really healthy for the nervous system. That's where you see benefits like increased immune system. Maybe you get sick less, you have more energy, you sleep better because again, remember we talked about that baseline of stress, you're operating at a less stress state. Your nervous system's at a more efficient state where it's not holding on to that stress as much. So that's another one that's important to kind of point out.
That's excellent. Our title today is Demystifying Meditation. Could you talk a little bit about this as a model for helping us deal with these stresses and such?
Sure. You have to understand meditation is an umbrella term like sports. So sports can mean a lot of different things and cover a lot of activities and mean a lot of different things depending on who you mention the word to. So meditation has a lot of different traditions, methods, even definitions of meditation are argued or differ. We could just look at it today as a model of kind of a science-based definition that meditation would be a systematic way or a formal technique to slow the brainwave activity. That might be a simple way to start understanding it from a very practical, very science-based. So what that means is you're starting generally we're at what's called the beta wave state. In our waking state, we're in beta. And the way they measure state, Steve, is they put on a device and they'll measure the brainwave is basically an electrical impulse that fires off. and they measure it by hertz. Hertz is just how many times that impulse goes off within a second. So the faster the impulses, the more like a beta might be anywhere from 20 hertz, 20 times per second. It can go all the way up to 40, 50. That's a very fast brainwave, and then that corresponds with what? Very fast thinking, right? Body's a little more tense. You're not in such a relaxed, creative state. You're thinking a lot. Your focus, it's concentration. It's a state we need. I mean, we're going to sit down and take an exam, or we're going to go on a job interview. It's a state we need. The problem is when you're living in that state, when that state is heightened, that beta state is heightened, it's also associated with anxiety, stress, and depression and health problems. So that state has to be balanced. It has to be kind of counteracted. So when you meditate, you go from that natural, not that natural, but that everyday beta state, that very fast thinking, to almost immediately you could get to what's called an alpha state. Now, an alpha wave state is slower. So it's only about 8 to 12 hertz, 8 to 12 times per second. So, I don't know, it's like laying on the beach and you're reading a book and the waves are crashing in, and you're just chilling and your breathing, is kind of slows down. You're entering an alpha wave state, or you're walking through a beautiful garden and you're admiring the butterflies and the birds. That's an alpha wave state. So meditation systematically teaches you learn how to go from that faster brainwave state to a slower one. And then you can even dip to theta, which is even slower, and then delta, which is generally experienced just during very deep sleep. But you can dip into those even slower brainwave states where there's very high levels of creativity and relaxation and other benefits. Everyone, Steve, meditates. If you look at when you go to bed at night and you go to sleep, you go from beta, alpha, right, theta to delta. You go through that process of brainwave, slowing the brainwaves. You're just not conscious. You're right. You're not awake. When you go into meditation, you're basically a similar process to sleep, but you're wide awake. You're very conscious of what's around you. You're very conscious of what's going on inside the inner dimensions of your mind. So I always people go meditate. I don't meditate. Well, yes, you do. Every night you go to sleep, you're going into meditation. You're just not staying awake. So it's the systematic way of staying awake as you drop into those deeper brainwave states. So that's one model that we could use.
That's awesome. I appreciate you explaining that, especially with the brainwaves and what's happening with our body, because it's sometimes you got so much going on that heart's pumping fast, and you may not be able to see the brain waves, but whatever the brain's thinking about, that's got it kind of messed up a little bit, and it's it's all about trying to slow that down. I guess is trying to help you get a little more focused on what's going on out there. Would that be okay?
That would be accurate, yeah. And something, I don't know if I mentioned the earlier part about what happens during the brain, but coherence is the word that's often used. So coherence is what the brain working together in harmony, all the parts, and it's very, very clear thinking, right? Not too fast, not too slow, very clear thinking. You have focus, your memory's working well. So coherence is what we're really after. Incoherence comes from high levels of stress, right? Living in that stress state create incoherence in the brain and body. So what we're after is coherence.
Gotcha. Awesome. All right. So could you, let's talk a little bit, because you shared some, a little bit about specific ways we could change the brain waves. Do you have some specific strategies that we could use to get it to kind of slow down and help us out a little bit?
Yeah. There's a number of them that work really well and scientifically been validated to work well. The breath is probably the simplest. It's used in a lot of different meditations, is the breath. But another one I like to share is what they call open monitoring. This involves sensing or kind of paying attention to the space around you. So what they found is if they hooked you up to brain imaging, is that as soon as you shift your attention from what we would call three-dimensional reality, objects around you, as soon as you shift it to what's around those objects and outside this, what we would just call the space, the empty space, you start to shift right to an alpha wave state very quickly. Why? Because you're not thinking so much, right? You move away from that intellectual, that cognition, and now you're in more of a feeling space, and it will shift you very quickly to an alpha wave state. So we could do one at the end if you'd like to.
That'd be awesome.
experiment with that. We can have people go through. Another way would be the breath. Very simply, researchers have also found if you just lengthen the breath and you just continue consistently do that, that will also start to slow the brainwave. It'll calm the nervous system and slow the brainwave state pretty much every time. So you could start with like you're breathing in, and then you just kind of increase it. You can count to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the out breath, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 out, and then you can kind of bring it up to about 6. If you bring it up to like 6 seconds in and 6 seconds out, again, what happens is the physiology calms down. You start to activate the parasympathetic, and then that voice inside the head, that intellectual, part of the brain, it just starts to shut off, and then you'll shift to more of an alpha wave state. So that's another very simple way to start to calm the nervous system.
That's cool. So let's kind of put this into an educator's world, which would be
Yes.
like, when I was a high school teacher, I had 5 periods that I taught and one that I had planning. And I had some mini breaks in between each class. And so as elementary and middle school teachers may have something kind of similar, but usually they're with the kids a little longer. Talk about how could you take that, what you just described as the breathing, and make it work for you? Like if you had a minute and you felt yourself kind of, this is a rough day or something like this, how could you use that in the time frames that you might have during the day as a teacher or administrator?
Yeah, so I have one student, his name is Bo, and he was a newly appointed assistant principal. And he learned some of these, what we call mindfulness meditation, and some of this breath work techniques from me during classes. And his blood pressure was high. His doctor said, your blood pressure is high. And I think some of his health metrics were off. He had to do some things, right? He was too stressed, and he's starting this new assistant principal job, and he's also working on his doctorate of education. So he had a full plate. So what he started to do was during his lunch break, now he has the luxury of having an office. I mean, teachers might have a classroom, they can close the door at lunch or planning, but he would go in his office, shut his door, maybe shut his lights. And all he did for about, 10 minutes is he just focused on his breath, what we just did, and just focusing on the breath, and you can lengthen the breath. And he just did that practice, and within a couple of weeks, his blood pressure started to go down. His doctor said, what are you doing? You're doing something different. He said, yeah, I learned this meditation, this breathwork stuff, and I'm doing it, during the school day. And then he started doing it at home. When he got home at night, he would maybe do another session. And just that, and I've seen students, I had a student, an undergrad, who was a high achiever. She was the captain of the soccer team, but she was very stressed. She took it was a course on mindfulness with me, and she started to do that breath work, and she would insert it like before she went to class, in between classes, she would sit and do it, whatever, in the library. And again, the face changed, she relaxed. People started saying, what are you doing? Because she took that baseline and she lowered that baseline. She was no longer living in that kind of survival mode, just from simple techniques. So for a teacher, if you could do it in the morning before you go to school, like when you first wake up, if you have some kind of meditation practice, and we can talk more about how you create a practice and sustain it. But on the fly, if you're in school and you're in between classes, you could do very simple things. There are different what we call breath work techniques. There's what you call energy practices, where you could just take a breath, right? In between class, and you're waiting for the next group of kids to come in, you could just focus on your breath going in and do there's a technique called box breathing. And box breathing was created by a colleague of mine, Mark Devine. He's a former Navy SEAL, best-selling author. And he's done an incredible job of taking like what was considered Eastern, right, my practices, and he's westernized them and put them into programs. And he coined the term box breathing. A lot of times people just teach it and use it and don't give him credit, but he actually came up with box breathing in his own practice because he had to have his Navy SEALs. I mean, he's out over enemy lines, never mind teaching classes. He's out fighting for his life in combat. And he developed this technique that on the spot to calm him down and focus him. So box breathing works like this. It's called box breathing because it's 4 equal breaths. So what a teacher could do is start to do box breathing whenever they had a few minutes or they started to feel frazzled. And you would breathe in for 4. You hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You breathe out for 4. Hold for 4. breathe 4, and then you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4. See, you're drawing a box, right? There's a figurative box or imaginary box you're drawing. But yeah, so they could do something like that, even in a more abridged version. Hold in for 2 or 3, breathe out 2 or 3, hold for 2 or 3. And they could work that kind of as a habit in between the classroom. That's a very effective technique that, a lot of high performers use that.
That's awesome. And I appreciate you sharing that, especially when we think about with teachers specifically, especially in an elementary setting, they tend not to have a whole lot of time with breaks. All right. And so when they do find that time, let's use that to go to the next part that you talked about, which is creating a practice that you could make happen, get better at it and make it more of a regular thing that you do.
Yeah, so you want to start with figuring out your goals. I think you want to think about, is it stress reduction? Is it more energy you want? Is it improve the health, the sleep better? But maybe it's all of those things, right? Better relationships. And then from there you say, well, what are the techniques or what's the methods that I kind of got to put into place? And how do I, was once asked, like, what's the best meditation? Is the one you can do every day, right? It's the one you stick with. So you want to figure out something that's going to work for you and that you can continue to do, for years and years. That takes some experimentation, Steve. There's not like one prescribed, method I could say is the best. It's usually a combination of things and takes some, you have to try some things out for a little. But where you start is gradual. So you learn a meditation technique. Now there's modules, there's books, there's videos. If you could find an instructor, that's probably best. But there's all kind of online trainings and videos and things like that now where you could learn some of these techniques, and you start gradual. So let's just say you're just doing a mantra meditation, or you're going to do this, breathing meditation, breath meditation, what's called mindfulness meditation. Just start simple with like 5 minutes. Wake up in the morning. And we can talk a little bit about when and where and why, but morning seems to be best from a scientific point of view. Remember we talked about the brainwave states? When you first wake up, remember you're moving from deeper states. So you kind of get up in like an alpha wave state. You're not in that beta fast thinking, check my emails and, do my text message. You're not really there yet when you first get up. So it's the ideal time to do your meditation, because you're already halfway there. You're kind of in those slower brainwave states. So you want to take advantage of that window. So get up, maybe you go to the bathroom and some water on your face or whatever, and then you sit down, find a quiet place. That's another tip, is as quiet as you can. There could be noise. You can still meditate with noise, but you want to minimize distractions. You can also do that with, I've tried earbuds. You put earplugs in. You could put one of those sleep masks on, and you go in another bedroom, another room or a corner of the house, and you kind of try to block out the sensory distraction. And then you do your meditation. Just start with 5 minutes. And then the next day, maybe for a couple of weeks, then you extend it. You maybe work towards 10 minutes. Maybe you could do 15 minutes in the morning. And then you just kind of look at your life as evidence of whether it's working. Because people go, how's it working? Well, it's hard to tell because everyone's so different, right? We're all designed and wired different, so it's hard to tell. But some simple questions you can say is something getting better? Do I feel better? Do I feel calmer? Am I less reactive? Am I focusing more at work? Am I a little more productive? What's my relationships like? So in other words, is life getting better? Like, you don't meditate just to meditate. There's a teacher, Emily Fletcher. She has some books and she teaches a form of mantra meditation. And she has a phrase that says something to the effect of, the purpose of meditation is to get better at life, to get good at life or get better at life, right? So in other words, if you're meditating, spending all this time and you're not getting more efficient, you're not calmer, there's not you don't have more energy, then why are you doing it? Unless it's for some kind of religious or spiritual practice, like, why are you doing it? So you have to find something. And after a few weeks, it might take a month. Is life getting better in some way? Do I feel better? Are things going better? And sometimes people will comment, Steve, they might even say, you seem less stressed, or you laugh more, or you're really getting a lot done. Like, people will start to notice too, I think, sometimes once you found the right method for you, and then you just go with it, and then you expand it. And then I think you also want to add other techniques during the day. So what I mean by that is if you do a morning meditation, what I find is that's often not enough to sustain you through the day. You know what I mean? Then you get the kids coming, you have like 3 classes in a row and the kids act up and there's a lot of, management, or a parent gives you a call and rattles you. So that's where you have box breathing, right? That's where you're doing different breath work, or maybe you could fit some yoga in during the day or after. That's where you kind of work in some other mind-body practice, because it all works together, it all integrates. So then you kind of fuse other things in. But your morning meditation could serve as your base. That's setting the tone for the day. That's like base camp. That's the foundation.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing, and especially in this manner, because you're helping with some tools that might help the classroom teacher or building administrator with, something how to start their day, or how to, find some time during the day to bring themselves back into a better working mindset, I guess, and or at the end of the day, to be able to kind of refocus. I like that. Something that you mentioned just a minute ago that I kind of want to come back to is that, because I've read a little bit about your words where you've talked about getting distracted, that sometimes, it's quite normal that we can get distracted during the day or what we're trying to do. Could you share some specific ways to refocus your attention that might be in this?
Yes. The first premise, or the first thing to understand, is you're going to have thoughts. You're going to get distracted. If you sit down to meditate and you do one of these contemplative or mind-body practice, you're going to have thoughts. It's completely normal. It's completely natural, because that's the way your brain is designed. And there was some researchers I believe they were at Emory University. They mapped the brain and what happened during mindfulness meditation. And essentially, Steve, went like this. You start to meditate, so you start to focus on your breath, and then you get distracted. Sometimes almost immediately. And then the next thing they notice that happened in the brain is you come back to it. That's what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is returning back, right? So you return back to the breath, and then you sustain it, and then it happens again. You get distracted. Then you go, oh, I'm distracted. You go, let me return back to the breath, right? Let me regain my focus. And then that sustains for a little while, depending on your level of experience or what's happening in your body that day. And then you get distracted. So it's a loop. So understand it's completely normal. The way that you want to deal with thoughts and distractions in meditation is not to make a big deal of them. They're going to come, they're going to go. The ancients used to use say clouds in the sky. They're just clouds passing in the sky and go by. You just watch your thoughts. You don't get caught up in them, and then you come back to your technique. So if your technique is the breath, you would just return back to the breath and not make a big deal of thoughts. They're part of the experience. They help you with the training and awareness. Now, if you're distracted outside of meditation, there is also things you can do. Again, you could use the breath. So if you're really kind of frazzled one day and you're trying to focus on writing a lesson plan, or you're trying to focus on a conversation with your principal, just coming back very easily to the breath, being aware of the breath, coming back to how it's just kind of flowing in and out, just the normal rhythm of the breath, that in itself could help you. You're kind of training the brain, you're training cognition to be focused. You can come back to the body. Very simple thing could be to ground yourself. So you could be aware of how you're sitting right now, and the feet are planted on the floor, and you can be aware of any sensations in the body. So you use the body to ground you. That could be another tool to help with focus. So those are the things to kind of do on the fly, but hopefully that helps.
Oh, most definitely. We're getting close to finishing up our talk, and before we do that, can you explain what meditation on wheels is?
Yeah, that term I read it in an article. It was on the Harvard University Harvard Medical School website. One of the authors coined that term and was referring to practices like Tai Chi, yoga, Qigong, and was saying they're like meditation on wheels. So they're movement-based meditation, right? Or movement-based practice. And I think they're really important because, number one, it's hard for some people, their temperament and their energy level look at children, right? To sit in one place and just, pay attention to the thoughts or focus on the breath. But you get similar benefits by doing things like yoga. I think that's why yoga is so popular. It started out as a very physical, right? In America, in the West, it's a very physical based activity. But if you are bringing intentionality to it and you're focusing on your breath as you do the movements, you are practicing mindfulness. You are increasing, right? Cultivating awareness. Tai Chi and Qigong are ancient Chinese energy system, really health systems. And it's just it's these sequences of slow movements that, again, coordinate the breath with the movement. And that's training the awareness. But you're getting similar benefits. You're getting reduced stress. You're improving your health, right? Improving cognition. And then it was a recent one. It was also Harvard Medical School. They just came out a recent article that said that they recommended Tai Chi and Qigong over walking for older people because walking is great. Don't stop walking. But Qigong and Tai Chi incorporated awareness and coordination. They work coordination and balance and other things that maybe walking is not exactly hitting, right? As far as benefits. So that's what it is. It's finding ways to move and gaining similar benefits to a meditation practice. Or I would like, what I do is complement your formal sitting meditation practices with movement-based practice. I think the two of them, that's the yin and yang. See, those just work together fantastic because one is sitting and training the awareness, the other one is moving and cultivating the awareness through movement, which is great for the body.
Awesome. I appreciate that. So before we finish up, because I'll have one last question after this one, can you tell our listeners where they can find additional information, connect and learn more and find your book and so forth?
Sure. The book's the easiest place would probably be Amazon, the Amazon website, and just search up my name or the name of one of the books like Calming Student Stress. They're also published by, it was Rowman and Littlefield, which has been absorbed by Bloomsbury. So if they go to Bloomsbury Publishing, they would also find the books. Those would be two good places to look.
Excellent. I'll put that in the show notes so that it's easy to find. And so what I'd like to do to finish up is, could you lead us in a sample of a practice to calm ourselves and meditation here before we finish up?
Sure, I'd love to. What I'm going to do is lead you through a meditation that combines the two things we talked about, the open monitoring, right? Sensing the space, and also using the breath. So it's going to combine those two things, and we'll just do a brief version so everyone can get a taste of it, but then you'll maybe understand those two concepts a little better. So the very first thing is the position. And depending on tradition, they can be more strict about the position, but I like to say just sit comfortably so that you can sustain the meditation, not have to move around a little bit so much. So maybe the back's fairly straight, the feet are planted on the ground, and the hands can just be relaxed on the lap or cupped like this. If you can, closing the eyes would generally help because you want to turn the attention inward, right, internally. So closing the eyes. And what you want to do is just breathe and just notice where the breath kind of enters the nostril and then comes out. And as you do that, just notice kind of the length of the breath. And you'll notice most of it happens in the chest. So breathe a little deeper. And you'll notice you can actually fill up the chest. You notice it goes down towards the ribs, right? That you can actually take in more air when you become intentional and conscious about it. So then another breath, and you can even breathe down towards like the abdomen. So you breathe into the chest, down in the sternum, and you can even kind of fill up the abdomen. In the next breath, just even imagine you're going down towards the knees, like through the legs. So now you're breathing through the body, taking a deeper breath, and you can breathe right down through the legs. And then on this one, even towards the feet. So just imagine you're breathing down all the way towards the feet. So now your breath is even deeper. And then breathe out slow. And just doing that alone will start to lengthen the breath, and you're starting to oxygenate the body, and you'll even feel calmer. So breathing all the way down to the feet, the whole body. And then we'll just bring in the next, you could do that for several minutes, but we'll just bring in the next technique just for, as an example. Now become aware of the space just around you. So as you breathe in, just be aware of the space kind of outside your body. It's almost like an outline or just an empty space around you. You don't have to picture it. If you just kind of sense it, just sense the empty space around you. And then you can even sense the empty space maybe in your legs or between your legs. There's kind of an empty space. As you continue to breathe deeply, you can even sense the empty space in the abdomen, around the abdomen. in the chest. There's kind of empty space as you breathe, right? But also around the body, around the chest, there's empty space. Up to the throat, even around the throat, it's kind of empty space. There's like nothingness. You can kind of be aware of that in the head. And then again, the whole body is kind of empty space. And also be aware of the breath. And then whenever you finish a meditation, you want to take your time so you can do a few things. I teach students, keep your eyes closed and you can kind of wiggle your toes, right? Wiggle your hands, just kind of come back to reality. You can blink your eyes. You don't want to jump right out and shock your system. So when it feels right, you blink your eyes. When it feels right, you just kind of come back to. Now, see, we only did that for, I don't know, it was a minute, 2 minutes, but so if you were to try that, you could do the breathing, filling up the body and elongating the breath. Maybe you could shoot for 3 minutes or 5 minutes, right? And then you could also spend another couple minutes just becoming aware of the space that's in, like your legs, but around your legs, in your torso, but around your torso. And even just doing one of those techniques, I think if you sustained it for a number, maybe 5 minutes, you would start to feel a difference in your body, your physiology. You would feel just calmer, lighter, maybe a little, you clear-headed, just from a technique like that.
That is awesome. Steve, it's great talking with you again today. I appreciate you sharing all this information about meditation and becoming very practical so that our school teachers and building administrators could figure out some practices to help them reduce that anxiety and stress that they experience throughout the day. So Steve, thank you so much for talking with us about demystifying meditation practice for educators. I mean, this was a great conversation, practical, and so useful. Thanks for sharing with us, and wish you the best in all you do.
Thank you so much, Steve, for having me on.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching Learning Leading K12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching Learning Leading K12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.